Live recording, off we go. Exports, OEC, Marcher, Cavalier. What are we looking at here on the screen?
So, firstly, just a bit of context. What drew this topic to my attention as to what the wider coronavirus impacts might be is the recent figures that came out for Germany when not the OECD, the Eurozone was, sort of releasing a lot of their figures. We found that Germany is stagnating a bit, and a big part of the reason for that is because they have what one might call an overexposure to China.
Meaning that they are reliant on Chinese goods?
Meaning that they are reliant on Chinese cash or Chinese demand for their exported products.
Wow, so China is buying their stuff.
Yes. So I decided to have a quick look into what other countries might be a little bit overexposed to China.
Who else needs the China bucks? I can tell you half of Southeast Asia need the China bucks, but who else is looking pretty bad?
Well, so if you're looking at the origins chart, then we can have a quick look.
Stand by. Origins. Other Asia. I bet that's Southeast Asia as a whole. Oh no, we've got Thailand there. Yeah, go ahead. So Origins, it's a market worth 1.54 trillion.
Yes. So let's use the US as a benchmark. 8.7%, and that's of this total 1.54 trillion. So it's not weighted in relation to the size of the economies. So obviously, beyond the United States, the economies will be much smaller. So, for example, Germany, as we were just talking about, 6.2% in relation to the US is 8.7. So that represents a significant portion of the German economy. Like I said, I think it's somewhere between 6 and 10% of GDP, which is, of course, the overall size of the German economy. So a slowdown in China is having some pretty significant effects on the German economy.
Do you think, is this something that can be measured right now?
Yes, it has been. Do you want me to find some figures on that? Or?
No, we can keep going with this now, but that's interesting that there's already an impact felt already, an initial wave thing. But do you think we are due the recession that Peter Schiff has been saying is coming for the past 5 years as a result of this, even after this initial wave?
It's possible, but I wouldn't necessarily consider it particularly likely, per se.
Is it more likely a Eurozone recession or just a Germany-specific recession? I can't see France on here except for 1.4%, which doesn't seem like a lot.
Again, in relation to that economy, that's fairly significant, but no more exposed than the UK at similarly 1.4%.
Yes, I would consider the UK to be a little bit exposed as well, given how they talk to them on the public relations front. They're very pro-Chinese money. The great trading nation, right?
Well, actually, we can get back to that because, or we can hop over on that single point now.
Whichever movement is most efficient after you, sir.
So, if you go into the GB Times, China remains the second largest FDI recipient in the world. Have you got that?
Stand by. GB Times, bringing China closer. China remains second largest FDI recipient in the world.
So, FDI stands for foreign direct investment. This is basically recording where international capital goes. So if you go down to figure 3, you'll see that the US is in first place.
We have it, yeah.
So the US is in first place at 226 billion. China is second with 142 billion. This is for 2018, but it gives numbers for 2017 as well. The UK is third, perhaps surprisingly, if well, for me in the UK, it doesn't necessarily feel like it, but there we are. 122 billion, and then slightly cheating, Hong Kong in fourth at 112 billion.
What the
So I think it's probably...
So you need to basically just put Hong Kong and China together, and does that actually beat the US number there?
Yes, it does.
That's interesting, but I know that that works a very different way, i.e. China doesn't take direct money like pound for pound, dollar for dollar when a deal goes through Hong Kong. They take like a huge tax revenue input from it.
Yeah. So most of the companies have to be partnerships, as I recall, with either the government or local businessmen. I don't know the details on that, so suffice to say...
Nobody ever does unless they live in these places, because it changes every year. It's visa rules, work rules, all this stuff. It's changing very, very rapidly, not only like everywhere in the world, but specifically in places like Asia right now, because a lot of their economies are being turned. A lot of the economies out here in Southeast Asia, at least, are maturing, and we're seeing stuff like them kind of like peak out, and their quick input of technological and governmental update that they imported from the latest capitalist Western state.
Yeah.
That's now maturing, and I think this China coronavirus effect, and apparently, as of the 18th of February, Guangzhou is back to work. Sorry, I'll let you carry on from there, but I'm wondering what will happen now.
We'll get back to that in a second, but so let's run with the hypothetical here that it continues to be bad and remains an ongoing problem for at least a quarter, let's say, so that's enough for the economy or the economies to have to release the data on what's actually happening, and that will color expectations going into the future. So what that means in relation to the FDI is that if we take China, I mean, again, for the sake of argument, let's just say that China's foreign direct investment completely dries up. Not going to happen, but again, for the sake of argument, what we might expect to happen is the remaining 8 countries on this graph would receive the FDI that is being lost to China. So the US would benefit most significantly, probably being at the top. They probably represent the best, some of the best returns. But then, in descending order, the UK, Singapore, Spain, perhaps surprisingly.
Spain! My word.
Yeah.
Netherlands, I do expect to see, to be honest. I would expect something like Denmark, perhaps, but I don't know. I haven't actually visited. But Amsterdam, Netherlands, that kind of thing, I'm not surprised to see that. Many people forget that those were an imperial people too, so...
Yes, so they've still got a lot of large, well, Royal Dutch Shell, I mean, being an example of one of those.
Indeed.
One of those holdover companies from the colonial period.
Indeed, yeah.
That is still having some significant influence.
A lot of places are still named after these colonial people who are said to have discovered them, even in their own languages. So, yes. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. So next up, Australia, then Brazil and India. So, personally, if you'd asked me before having seen these figures, I would have suggested that Brazil and India would have been much higher. So obviously there's the BRICS, which is kind of a fading concept now, from my reading. So that included the developing economies the rapidly developing economies of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, I think.
Hmm.
Yes, South Africa, I believe. So it's yes, it is. It's quite interesting that Brazil and India are so low. And just to put it in a bit of perspective, Brazil in 2018 was at 59 billion, and India was at 43 billion. Whereas the United Kingdom, who was third behind China, was at 122 billion. Being in the UK, I would never have expected that.
You mean the effect of that isn't felt in the UK, right?
Well, I'm sure it is in London. Put it
Yes,
that way.
I can. Yeah, I agree. It is extremely centralized in the UK. I feel culturally, all of it all emanates from London, and I think everybody in the UK hates that now.
Yes, there's certainly been a bit of a revolt against that trend. But anyway, let's hop over back to the exports then, because we've covered the FDI now and what the possible outcomes would be there. So, like I said, probably the most surprising recipient of a potential slowdown in FDI inflows into China would be Spain, just behind Singapore at what would become number 4 potentially. All other things being equal, of course.
And then Spain will be Diamond League, right?
But then here's the other thing. So Spain does not actually have an enormous exposure to the Chinese economy. Going back to
Interesting.
that.
So maybe
Only-
an ascendant Spain. An ascendant Spain. I don't know. How smug do we sound as Anglos just sitting here going, Spain. Jesus. Watch out for the storm, boys.
But anyway, so let's go back to Asia briefly then, because perhaps unsurprisingly geographically,
Oh,
perhaps
Asian.
unsurprisingly, from a geographical perspective, some of the most overexposed economies are other Asian economies to the Chinese economy.
Of course, yeah.
In particular, South Korea. So they import goods from South Korea worth $150 billion a year.
That's huge.
And that represents 9.7% of the total imports.
Are you telling
China.
me? Are you telling me that South Korean pork that I had at Hot Pot was actually from China?
No, it would be the other way around.
Damn.
Things in China made in South Korea.
Terrible. Either
But
way,
again,
I
like you
feel
said-
disgusted, and I don't know how to describe or why that is, but I feel disgusted. Either source, no thank you.
Fair enough. But again, so to put that into perspective again, we typically think that the United States has some quite significant Chinese exposure, and they do at 8.7%. But in absolute terms, South Korea has more exposure to the Chinese economy in a export-reliant sense from the South Korean perspective.
Yeah, so if demand drops off, they take like a huge hit across the whole
Yeah,
fucking
but this is
framework.
in relation to a much smaller economy.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. How much is Korean economy going to be worth?
Let's have a quick look.
Isn't it insane that they can quantify at least the reported numbers for this kind of stuff, right? I
Yeah,
always
so-
wonder about like the people try to give estimates on what black markets are worth and stuff like that. Is that really just peering into the crystal ball? I feel like that is. When somebody's like trying to say that this economy is worth this much and the black economy of it doubles GDP or something like that. I've heard people talking about places in Southeast Asia that way.
With a more primitive economy, it is a little bit tricky, but in a more westernized, developed economy, then it's.
It's pretty much impossible, right? Other than the...
I wouldn't necessarily say. Well, I'd say it's much easier in a developed economy. Honestly, I don't know specifically how they do it, but if I had to guess, it would probably be something to do with trying to track non-registered or like non otherwise economically registered transactions and transfer of goods.
They're coming for your cash transactions.
So this is obviously the thing with hedging and whatever, is the attempt to turn the black market goods into above board goods, or laundering money to try and make it legitimate.
Oh yeah, I know about an operation locally that tries to do that, tries to turn black market stuff into, I don't know, what do you call it? Legal market stuff? Registered market stuff?
Well, I use the word legitimate, I think, but
yeah. Legitimate's a good way to put it, yeah. And
anyway,
go ahead.
So the South Korean economy, so the South Korean GDP in US dollars is 1.531 trillion in 2017. And again, to put that into some perspective, the United Kingdom GDP in US dollars, at the same time in 2017 was 2.622 trillion.
The difference is big.
Yeah, the US. So again, much larger percentage of the Chinese import market in real terms. But the US economy is 19.39 trillion US dollars in 2017.
Eclipsed, I would say.
Yeah. But that means that this alone represents, what is that? Just a straight up 1/10 of the entire GDP of South Korea. I
can tell you that tourism all over Asia is really low now because of Vietnam, Thailand, even Myanmar nowadays, Malaysia as well, takes a hit from the coronavirus and being restricted, either like being made to feel unwelcome in these countries, and like you see viral social media posts and people like flinching away from the Chinese, like they're gonna get this steroids enabled Ebola tier virus if they go anywhere near a Chinese person. And it's interesting to see that this is all now linked. And where are we going next with this, Marcher? Let's see.
I'm just double checking something, because if you can, well, okay, no, it doesn't matter. We'll come back to it later. So, all right, yeah, let's change course a little bit, because different countries have been attempting to close, like travel and the flow of goods, and essentially just quarantine the Chinese economy to try and mitigate the damage done by the disease. But I put it to you that the extent to which these countries are reliant on Chinese cash, or have a significant part of their debt that is owned by China, they might find it a touch more difficult if and when the Chinese government decides that it needs its export and import markets to remain open. So if you hop over to the Statista link that I sent you.
Stand by. Yes. Closing their invitation for the fucking newsletter. The countries most in debt to China. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, external debt to China as a percentage of GDP, what we find is, well, so let's go through some of the largest offenders. So Djibouti, Niger, Republic of the Congo.
Is that how you say that country's name? Niger. Niger.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, Republic of the Congo, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Cambodia. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Cambodia and Maldives. None of these places, I suppose, with the possible exception of the Republic of the Congo, Laos, and Cambodia, are particularly significant, particularly for yourself, perhaps.
Whoa! What?
Over in
I can tell. I can tell you, Indochina's taking a hit right now, all over.
Yeah.
Siamese economy, Kampuchea, those little Cambodian fellas over there as well. Everybody's taking just a big old right sock in the jaw, you know.
But interestingly, there are some other countries in here to note. So Egypt and Russia, for example, both seem to have. I'm struggling to tell the shade there exactly because it's done by color coding. So can you tell if it's between 1 and 5% or 5 and 10% of their?
It looks like 1 and 5 to me.
Yeah, but again, we're talking whole numbers of percentage of GDP.
Yeah,
So
that's in
quite
these larger economies. That's again more significant, especially with Russia. You know, like being both supposedly an ally in some cases, but actually it's like very direct competition due to borders, economies, and everything, right?
Yeah. India is not too badly exposed.
Less than 1%.
Less than
Yeah.
1%. Yeah, less than 1%. Pakistan, on the other hand, might struggle with between 10 and 25%. Now, as a slight aside, as I recall, there are some issues over in Pakistan with some significant Chinese investment that's going on over there, particularly in the Baluchistan region, which is, for a bit of context, that would be the southwesterly part that's sort of just below Afghanistan and bordering with Iran.
Yeah, I think we only did 4 weeks worth of mind manipulation, targeted individual assaults in this region before we had to move on and wrap it up, because we're at 23 minutes now. Have you got somewhere you would like to take this from here? What do you think is going to be, if we go like bring the lens out as far so we are just looking at the world economy, what do you think comes next as a result of all this? Do you think somebody's going to be taking a good opportunity from this, or do you, because okay, I'll tell you that I think the US is just going to continue to ascend, that they seemingly have done for the past 5 years, 4 years, maybe even 10 years. Economically, but what else do you think is going to be happening from this?
So, a big part of economics is expectations, and so all that we really need necessarily is a knock, well, an additional knock even to the long-term prospects of China, or at least to see that it's maybe not necessarily a straight road to prosperity, for people to start thinking twice about their investments. And this is kind of a trend that's already taking place as it becomes more and more evident that for example, the intellectual property laws are not the most robust over in China, and the sort of casual corruption at times of local government officials. So this kind of thing is coming more into the fore. So in the long term, we might see a movement or a bit of a trend away from foreign direct investment into China, and a bit less. Maybe this. So maybe again, if this lasts for say a quarter, then it will be enough to spook a number of these countries into trying to diversify their economy a little bit away from just trying to rely on Chinese markets in order to prop up their economy, as is seemingly the case in Japan, South Korea, Germany, etc.
I can't wait for that to explode. Those kind of debt-driven, debt-saddled countries. They're some of the most stagnant places in the world. Like, if you actually visit and start to learn about what life is like, it's very deconstructed and closed off compared to its origins, and it's a direct result of this kind of like extremely optimistic market followed by stagnation. All right, men. We'll have to wrap this one up here. Have you got any closing statements? Anything you want to draw attention to, or put in the record for posterity?
Well, the only thing I would say is that so far this has only been a discussion of the economic impacts, and so I think the economic impacts compounded with perhaps other factors may make this a much more bleak picture for China than what we've talked about here would suggest on its own. Of course, being as it is that the situation of the economy seems to be a cornerstone of the stability of the state. So if that gets knocked even a little bit, well, what else might happen?
I hope that there is a revolution, don't you? That'd be great. Can we tune in and have chill streams? I've been talking about this for 2 years. We missed it with the Hong Kong thing, right? But I wanted to have chill streams where you don't really like take a political side, but you can just have a talk show whilst watching live streams of protests from all around the world. An apolitical protest stream.
Yeah, sounds good.
Alright, my man. Thank you very much. I'm gonna chuck this one over. Take care.